It's the 5th of December and it's time for the 5th entry in my 24 Ghost Stories for Christmas. I've put my Christmas tree up a little bit earlier than usual, but I thought I would put it up just to add to the atmosphere. Anyway, so the 5th entry in my 24 Ghost Stories for Christmas is the 1961 classic film The Innocents. It was directed and produced by Jack Layton, stars Deborah Kerr, and amongst its writers were the extremely famous Truman Capote. It is in fact an adaptation of one of the most highly regarded ghost stories of all time, Henry James's Turn of the Screw. It's a very ambiguous movie, and for many that's why they love it. And I have to say it's one which I've only returned to in the past year, and in the past year I've watched it a couple of times, and it's grown incredibly in my estimations with every viewing. It is very much a psychological horror film. It's not about what you see, it's not about shock, but it's about being chilled to your core by the use of sound, by the use of what people sometimes call personal horror, or horror of the personality, whereby we use a person's personality, perhaps their hysteria, the stress that they're under, to actually transfer that to the audience to create horror. And that's very much where The Innocents sits. The story of Turn of the Screw and The Innocents is of a governess, a woman who applies for a job as a governess to look after two children in this massive estate. And the crux of it is that the two children have actually recently become orphans, and the uncle whose task it is to raise the children, it basically doesn't want to. He is a bit of a playboy, but he will financially make provision for them, and he is hiring someone to, for all intents and purposes, raise them. He doesn't want anything to do with them. He doesn't want anything to do with that house, that mansion, the children, the servants. Let the governess deal with it, and it would just be left to itself. So Deborah Kerr, who plays the main character applying for the job, comes across as this very sort of prudish woman, very sexually repressed. It appears as if she comes from a very religious background, where she has been perhaps repressed or shackled emotionally. So she goes to this estate and she finds the two children and the servants, and everything seems fantastic. Everything seems great. The two children are, well, fun, a little bit misbehaved at times, but charming nonetheless. There's a boy and a girl. The boy has recently been sent back to the estate because he's done something at school. No one knows quite what he has done, but for all intents and purposes he has been expelled. Deborah Kerr right away strikes up, her character strikes up a rapport and connection with the two children, and she very much enjoys and loves mothering them and being their sort of sole carer. While she's there, she at one point believes that she sees a man on a balcony on the house from a distance, so she runs up and all she finds is the young boy. She then finds a locket with a picture on it of a man who is unidentified to her, and she then sees what appears to be an apparition of this man. The film then progresses as she also sees an apparition of a woman, and it's as if the man and the woman have some sort of influence over the children. We find out who these people are with time. What is amazing about the film is that it takes one key scene from the original, I hate to say short story, because Turn of the Screw sits in that grey area between a novella, a short novel, and a short story. You know, it's not quite a short story, it's too long to be a short story, but it's too short to be a short novel. But nonetheless it is fantastic. it takes one pivotal scene, which is in the story, the governess sees the ghost first. She sees the apparition of the man first, then she sees a picture of him and identifies him as that's who I saw. In the film, they reverse this, the causality of this. So while the first time she actually sees the man close enough to see his features to identify who he is, she has already seen the picture of him. So it changes the entire complexion of the story, because has the seeing this picture made her even more delusional? Has she grafted that picture of that man onto this figure that she sees walking around? Or is it genuinely a ghost? And that is where the ambiguity of the film comes in. Is it in her head, or is it an actual haunting? What's brilliant about the film is that you don't get a clue to either. There are things in it where you could point and say, well, maybe it is a ghost. On the other hand, you could say, well, she's clearly unhinged and that it's some sort of psychological breakdown. That's the main strength of the film, is it is in its ambiguity, but it's not ambiguous in a frivolous way. It's been carefully crafted to be ambiguous. I hate watching or reading something that is ambiguous because the writer or the director didn't really know what to do, didn't want to commit to anything within the story. Here we have a film that is very much ambiguous and deliberately so. There are some aspects of the film which are, you know, very difficult to watch. At one point there is a brief, I suppose you would say, sexual act between a child and an adult, and this caused quite a stir at the time. Although you may think it's quite tame by today's standards, it is still something which catches you off guard, and it's one of the most sort of uncomfortable 10 seconds that you'll spend watching a film. It really is. The whole idea of sexuality, repressed sexuality, and child abuse is absolutely essentially intertwined into the story. And the question is the governess actually abusing the children in her own way? Is she transferring her attraction towards their uncle to them? Or have the children been abused previously by servants that were already there? So these are all questions that come up along the way. I cannot recommend the film highly enough. It's a type of film that I think John Carpenter mentioned it as one of the films that he thought was bullshit, you know, because you don't really see much, you know. But I think what you do see, the images that are presented to you, the way the story has been carefully crafted, and Freddie Francis, he does the cinematography for this, and you know Freddie Francis from the Hammer films and Amicus films. What a fantastic job he does. It's beautifully shot in black and white, and they deliberately tried to make sure that it wasn't similar to the Hammer horror films of the time. The director changed the position of the actors, the distance between the camera and the actors, to make sure that it didn't quite resemble the Hammer films. It's his own thing. It's incredibly well crafted, and most importantly, I think it's really frightening. I think it is a film which is, I would say it's one of the most frightening films I've ever watched. It's shocking, but not shocking in the way that we get now with horror films, with like torture porn and overt scares, jump out scares. It's a chiller, and that's the whole point. Ghost stories have been crafted to do that, to chill, not to shock, but to chill. And when I say chill, not in the modern sense, you know, to cause a chill in someone, to make them, you know, what they used to call, you know, there's that sort of spine tingling sensation, the feeling of the uncanny. So that's The Innocents. Can't recommend it highly enough. Go and watch it. I'll try and find a link to Turn of the Screw, the story, if you want to read it, down below. And one of the greatest horror films ever made, and I would actually now, with a few viewings, I now put it up there with Robert Wise's The Haunting, and you all know how much I love that film, and it's up there with The Exorcist and The Shining and all that. In fact, there's an argument to say that The Innocents may even top both of those films. Anyway, that's The Innocents, 1961. Go check it out. I'll be back tomorrow with I'll start again. My 6th entry in the 24 Ghost Stories for Christmas. Hope you're enjoying it. Hope you like the Christmas tree, and I hope you're all getting geared up for a great Christmas time, and perhaps even a spooky one in the run up. Bye for now.